Hi everyone! Today we will learn how to safely shut down senhasegura instances in a clustered environment. Here I have a 2-node cluster. My primary node is on the left and my secondary node is on the right. It is important to know that because we have to identify the main node. If you're not sure, run the command orbit application status. This will tell you what the primary node is and will tell you if this is the main node. It also confirms that the instance is in a cluster and that the application and replication are active. This command has confirmed that this node is the primary node, and it even gives me the host name, cofre_1, and you will see it's the same host name here in yellow. And it says that I am in the main node. If I run the same command on the secondary node, most items will be the same, but it will tell me that the node I'm using is not the main node of the cluster. The main node is this one. And why did I say that it is important to identify the main node? Well, when you shut down a senhasegura clustered environment, the main node should always be the last shutdown. In other words, shutdown always takes place in reverse order. In this example, first we shut down the secondary node and then the primary node. If you had 3 nodes in your cluster, the tertiary node would be the first to be shut down, then the secondary, and finally the primary node. The primary node should always be the last one to exit the cluster. Okay? What if I decide to reboot them? Well, then you go the other way around. You should start the nodes in hierarchical order. First, you start the primary node, then the secondary node if you have 2 nodes like me. With 3 nodes, remember you shut down the tertiary node first, then the secondary, then the primary. So you do the other way around. You first boot the primary node, then the secondary, then the tertiary. Also, during reboot, wait for the first node to enter the cluster before moving to the next. You can monitor this process by looking at the cluster size in our web interface or by running simple commands, right? Well, to see the cluster size in the web interface, go to Orbit, Replication Status. You see that my cluster size says 2 because my 2 nodes are still active. We will shut down 1 to see it change. Now that I know which is my main node, I can start by shutting down the secondary node on the right, but remember that Orbit has a special command for shutdowns. If you're familiar with Unix, you know there are different ways to shut down a Unix server. But please do not use these commands. Instead, use the command orbit shutdown. Orbit shutdown not only removes the node from the cluster, but also safely stops several different senhasegura tasks that are essential to the application. I repeat, do not shut down a senhasegura server using Unix binaries. Use the command orbit shutdown. Deal? Having said that, I'll shut down the secondary node first. I will be prompted with a message to confirm this action. Choose yes. And this will lead senhasegura to stop database services, one of the main services in the platform. After you run the command, you can actually still interact with the terminal because this command is still stopping these essential services in the background. Only after all services have been stopped, the command will shut down the entire terminal. So wait for the complete shutdown. Done. This instance seems to be down. I don't have access to it anymore, but I can double check by looking at the cluster size. Go to the web interface and refresh the status page. My cluster size will go from 2 to 1. Now I can shut down the primary node, repeat the command orbit shutdown, and wait for the complete shutdown of the instance. Done. The main node is also down. But how can I turn them back on? Well, let's say you have finished the maintenance process that required the shutdown in the first place and now you want to start them again. If you remember what I said earlier, shutdown happens in reverse order, but reboot happens in the regular hierarchical order. First, you boot the primary node. It might take a few minutes before the database is up and running. 5 minutes should be enough. Then you should log the web interface to this instance and check the cluster size. Let's do that. Done. The primary node is back on. It has automatically rejoined the cluster after identifying it is the main node of this particular cluster, so now the cluster is back on. But what should I do if, after rebooting the primary node, it says database not available? I mean, if you try to log into the web interface after this terminal is back on, trying to connect to the database using the SSH protocol and the MT4 admin credential, but when you type the IP or DNS address of the primary node and the status says database not available, you can force start the cluster by running the following command: orbit cluster start. But you have to add the IP of the main node. You know what the main node is because you checked it before the shutdown. So in this example, the IP is 10.66.34.66. Your address will be obviously different from mine, but since you checked what the main node was before shutdown, you should have this information. Recap: I shut down my instance, turn it back on, it automatically entered the cluster, so the cluster started without human interference. But if for some reason the status of your primary node says database not available, you can log into the instance using the SSH protocol and run the command orbit cluster start -IP and then add the IP address of the main node, okay? Back to the web interface, we can refresh and see that the cluster size is 1. This is because we haven't yet rebooted the secondary node, right? This is still down, but after reboot, it should automatically re-enter the cluster as well. This node will identify that the main node of the cluster is active, so when the database services are back on, it will send a request to the primary node, and the primary node will send all the information added to the database while the secondary node was down. This is why it is so important to shut down the primary node last and boot it first, because it is responsible for having the latest version of the database. Now that the main node is on, let's move on to the secondary node. Okay, back on, I can interact with the terminal. The video was cut, but I waited 5 minutes, okay, to restore the database services. It is important that you wait a few minutes so that all service can be restored. But now I'll check if the cluster size says that the secondary node is back and synced. So I go back to the web interface and refresh the status page, and you can see that my cluster size says 2. I also have the cluster members here at the top, and everything looks fine. I have 2 nodes, Cofre 1 and Cofre 2. This ends our tutorial on how to safely shut down instances. I'll recap because I know there's a lot to remember. You should always shut down terminals in the cluster reverse order. If you go to replication settings, you can even see that more clearly. The reverse order goes from right to left. First, I shut down additional member 1, then the primary member. After shutdown is complete, you may have to restart the terminals. Now you can follow the correct order from left to right. Primary member first, wait 5 minutes, and then additional member 1. Okay? Thank you for watching.